Hello, everybody. My name is Diana. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and a member in good standing with the ICCRC, Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council. So, this has been a crazy, crazy, crazy week with press conferences after press conferences from the Prime Minister, from cabinet ministers, and announcements after announcements when it comes to COVID-19 and what that means for immigration, for entry to Canada, for the land border between the US and Canada. So let's talk about that. So on Monday, March 16, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, as well as some cabinet ministers, made their respective press conferences where they announced what travel restrictions, what is basically a travel ban. And there were a lot of questions that were left unanswered, a lot of people panicking, anxiety. So on Wednesday, finally, the order regarding those travel restrictions, regarding that travel ban, was finally published, which and now we can finally, I can finally make a video explaining some of this and answering some of the questions people have that were in people's minds that were made very clear during those press conferences on Monday. So let's talk about that. So that order from the council is going to last until this ban is going to last until June 30th, and then can be extended or can be completely lifted. Then we don't know at this point. It just depends on how the situation with this with COVID-19 is going to be at that time on June 30th. But until now, this travel ban is until June 30th. So uh, this order dictates that all foreign nationals are prohibited from entering Canada by airplane from a foreign country. Foreign nationals are anyone who is not a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. And there are some exceptions. There are some exemptions, right? People they can still travel to Canada even if they're not Canadian citizens or they're not permanent residents. So let's look at those exemptions, right? And a very important thing, even if people meet one of those exemptions and they can still travel to Canada, in order to do so, they'll still need to comply with the usual immigration requirements. Like if you're from a visa required country, you're required to have a TRV. If you're from a visa exempt country, you're required to have an ETA. So let's look now at the exemptions. So exempted from the travel ban are any foreign national who has only been in the United States or Canada during the period 14 days before the day on which they arrive in Canada. Right? This is because COVID-19 has a 14 days, a 2-week incubation period. So for nationals um, who only have been in the United States or in Canada during that 14-day period prior to arriving at a port of entry to request a new entry, then they're exempted from the travel ban, as well as any foreign national with spouse, common law partner, dependent child, or the dependent child of a dependent child, so a dependent grandchild, of a Canadian citizen or a Canadian permanent resident. And this also includes children of the foreign national spouse or common law partner of a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And the dependent child, it's the usual immigration definition of being under the age of 22, unmarried, and not in a common law relationship. So uh, when this travel ban was announced on Monday, March 16th, it was only referred to that exempted from this travel ban would be immediate family members of Canadian citizens or permanent residents. But at the time, they didn't define who is included as immediate family members, if they were siblings or uncles, cousins, fathers, right? So, but now the with the order actually being published, they clarified that the definition of immediate family member is the legal definition of a family member in Canadian immigration law, which is a spouse, common law partner, a dependent child, or a dependent child of a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. Those are exempted from the travel ban. Also exempted are any foreign national who has a special permission in writing from the Government of Canada to enter Canada for the purpose of reuniting family members. Also exempted are crew members of an aircraft. Those are still allowed to enter Canada, as well as First Nations registered as Indians under the Indian Act. Diplomats and their family members, their immediate family members, so spouse, common law partner, dependent child, or dependent child of a dependent child. Medical staff, this is very, very important. Medical staff who are invited to Canada by the Minister of Health to help in response of the COVID-19. Those are still allowed to travel to Canada, as well as persons arriving on a Canadian military aircraft. This refers to Canadian citizens who are abroad and cannot need to be repatriated to Canada, who can't leave their respective countries of residence. They can arrive. They can be transported to Canada by a military aircraft, right? Like it happened with those Canadians in that cruise ship near Japan, that they were brought to Canada and they were put in quarantine. But they arrived in Canada on a military aircraft. As well, also allowed to Canada are members of the Canadian forces and their immediate family, and as well as visiting forces, visiting military forces from other countries under the Visiting Forces Act. Also allowed to Canada are protected persons under the IRPA, Immigration Refugee Protection Act. This refers to people who are deemed to be people in need of protection, like people file a claim for refugee and are deemed to be not a conventional refugee, but a person in need of protection, so protected person. Also exempted are French citizens residents in Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. Saint-Pierre and Miquelon is an island, so that is close to Newfoundland and Labrador, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. But Saint-Pierre and Miquelon belongs to France. So French citizens who reside in Saint-Pierre and Miquelon can still travel to Canada, as long as they haven't been outside of those islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon or Canada or the US in the last 14 days. Or, like I said, certain prescribed persons identified by public health or Canadian government who must travel to Canada in the national interest or provide an essential service while in Canada. Those are still allowed to enter.